Good morning, folks, from Jeff's Little Engine Service. So today we're going to go deep. This is a lawnmower I just pulled out of the junkyard. As you can see, it's in pretty rough shape. And I want to rebuild it. I want to rebuild the whole thing. So first thing I want to do is tip it up and spin the blade and try to determine if there's compression. Normally I would pull the cord to do that, but there's no cord. So let's see, let me get my tripod. So before we can test this blade, what you want to do is hold this handle down, tie it down, so that takes the brake off the engine. So I first tip this up. One of the first things I notice is that the blade is on upside down. Let's go ahead and see if the engine has compression. Yeah, it kind of feels like it might have some compression still. The next thing I want to do is get it on a nice flat surface and check the oil. If there's oil in it, most likely the engine is still good. That's my determination process for that. We're on fairly level ground. Wipe off the okay. So there's your clean dipstick. And let's go ahead and dunk it in here. And you can see it's towards the, try to get a better camera view here. So there's not much oil in it. Let's test it again. Make sure we go all the way down. Yeah, definitely low on oil, but you know what? This is a Briggs and Stratton engine, and they are tough as nails. So I think this engine's still going to be good. So I guess at this point what we need to do is focus on getting a pull start handle back on it. That looks like this is the old one. Alright, let's get into it. It looks like we usually need a screwdriver to take this off, but it looks like this one just kind of pops off. I'll grab a screwdriver to get down in there. Yeah, so this is going to be a full rebuild, folks. I'm going to probably have to go through everything on this lawnmower. At least I like to, so I know everything's good. Looks like someone else has been in here because there is supposed to be bolts here to hold it down. Hopefully they didn't screw it up. Yeah, I still think we can rebuild it. I'm just going to start taking stuff off here and get a better view of the engine. Don't lose any of these parts. It's the carburetor. Looks pretty damn dirty. So once I get this stripped down a little bit like this, I'm probably going to clean it. I'm going to hose it down. I don't care about water getting in everywhere because I'm going to rebuild this whole engine anyways. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to get some soap and water and splash it over this thing and clean it up so it looks better for us to work on. All soaped up. We're going to let it sit for a while before I blast it off. Don't you go anywhere. We're going to need you. Ernest keeps saying I can't rebuild this lawnmower. Look at Ernest, it's already looking a lot better. One thing's for sure, this blade is done. We've got big chunks of metal coming off here. I don't know if that's coming off the deck or the blade. The blade is on upside down, as I said. I don't think I'm going to reuse this deck, but I do want to see if this engine's good, so I'm just going to try and get it going, and once I get the engine going, I'm going to take it off this piece of crap lawnmower, use it on a better one. Take that, Ernest. To get to the starter rope, we do have to take off the gas tank and the engine cover. You need a 5/16 socket, and I believe a 3/8 socket to do that. You have 3 bolts here, 1, 2, 3. You do have another gas tank mounting bolt over on this side, and that's a 3/8. But usually you don't have to loosen it up to get the gas tank just to fold back like that. And now we want to take off the oil spout, or at least loosen it. That's another 5/16. And the trick here is to just lift up this spout just a little bit, and then you can swing it outwards, push it back in. You can see there's a little hole right there that it sets in, so you pick it up, turn it out, push it back in, and you're good. So you have 4 3/8 bolts holding on this whole cover, 2 in front and 2 in back here. Hoping you can see that good. Right down behind the oil spout. One there, one over on this side. And then it looks like there's 2 in front as well. Oh! Not quite sure what's going on with this bolt here. Looks like that's a 7/16. Let me grab that. Maybe it was stripped out at one time, so the guy went with a 3/8 or a 7/16. It looks like someone had worked on this engine before, which is usually a little scary for a mechanic that knows what they're doing. Hopefully whoever worked on it didn't destroy too much stuff. So at this point, this whole engine cover will lift right off of here. Sometimes you have to shimmy it a little bit, but there you go. And there's the starter. Where the starter rope goes, looks like everything's still good in there. We just need a new rope. I'll show you guys how to do that. So you can tell it's still functioning correctly. It rewinds and snaps back. So, and both of the, see these little dogs that come out here? So you know that's good. So I think this component is good. I'm going to go ahead and spray a lot of lubricant down in there where the spring is and down in here. And let's see about replacing this. You can see that's where the rope is right there. I'm going to grab some pliers and pull that sucker out. So here's how to rewind your starter for your pull start. You can see the spring's still working. The little dogs are still coming out. These little white pieces here. I've already pulled out what was left of the spring. But now we need to wind this. And I think I usually wind it about 7 times. So I just like use this point here and turn it 7 times, and when I get it tight, I'll stick a screwdriver down through it to hold it in place. So let's see here. We got be kind of hard sometimes. And there's one turn. Two turns. That's three. Four. Looks like at about 4, this one's getting pretty tight. It seems like normally I do it 7 times, 6 or 7 times, but since 4 is tight, I'm going to put the screwdriver in place, lock it in position, and now we have to run the string through. So I have about 7 feet of rope now. That's what you need. And you'll want to make sure and cauterize the ends. And what I do is I cauterize about 1/4 inch of the end, and then, ouch, be careful. So I have kind of a hard tip now which I can thread through. So one of the best ways to do this that I've found is to find your outside hole right there, and then you line up this part right here, which is where the rope pulls through. You line it up with that, the outside hole, and then you thread it through and hope for a miracle. Let's see, try to do this while change the camera view here. Okay, there we go. So up here is where I need to come in through, and this little, alright, be careful not to let loose of it. So I think they're about lined up. Some people come in through this, through the pulley, but I come in through this way, and it seems to work pretty good, because if you get it lined up perfect, oh, see that? It'll come poking out that hole just like that. And you tie a knot. You can put this back into place. You always have to hold tension on that spring, unless you have a screwdriver jammed down through there. Well, that was not good. The dogs knocked over my camera. Luckily, I think we're still intact here and everything seems to be working. I did notice that it wasn't wound up enough, and for some reason now I can wind it more than the 4 times. I did spray some lube down in there, and that might have loosened up that spring. So anyways, once you're at this state, if you do need to wind it more, you can pull this cord through here, and now if you wind it, it'll work out, if you see what I mean here. Keep this cord long, and there's one extra wrap. I think we could probably go for more, so we'll pull it all the way out, lock it in place, get a piece out here. Make sure not to let that thing go flying. Alright, there you go. You wind it. I'm going to try to get 2 more winds out of it. Yep. So that ends up being like 6 or 7 winds on this thing, which is normally how I do it. I'm not sure why it wouldn't allow me to do that the first time. The spring must have been bound up in there or something. But don't let go of this rope, because it'll suck it all the way in now. So you want to make sure to get yourself a handle on this end now. I think we're good. Let's test this thing out. Yep. And I'm going to reuse this. Basically what you do is you just stick a screwdriver, try and pry this metal piece out. Careful. There we go. And that's what you got here and what you got there. You put the rope up through here, through the hole there, tie it, put things back in, and you're good to go. So while I'm at this stage, I think it would be a good idea to gap the coil. It's easy enough. All you need is a 1/4-inch socket and a set of feeler gauges, more specifically a size 12 feeler gauge. What you want to do is basically the gap is between the coil here and the magnets on the flywheel, and these are the magnets, so you'll want to rotate the flywheel till you get to there. And it looks like this side is pretty well, the 12 slides in and out with a little bit of resistance, so that side set pretty good. This side I think is a little tight because I can barely get that 12 in there. You know, it might just be rust. Let me see. Yeah, you know, I think that one's set pretty good too. That's my 12, and it's sliding in and out with slight resistance. So I think that's good, but I think there is rust in there. Try to clean up a little bit. Couldn't hurt anyways. So yeah, if you had to gap the coil, you'd loosen up these two nuts, or these two screws, and basically just set each side at 12. And when you retighten, be very careful. These are very easy to strip out. They're 1/4-inch, really soft metal screws, so be careful. So we have the starter cover done. We have the coil gapped, and we do feel like we have compression here. I think it might be time to take off the fuel tank, clean it out, and empty it out, and then start take a look at what the inside of the carburetor looks like. These fuel lines are pretty gross, so I'm sure I'll have to replace those. There we go. And then a 3/8, like I was saying earlier, in the back here of the gas tank to get the gas tank off. And that nut's located right there. Or bolt. And there is a spacer, a plastic spacer in behind, so you don't want to lose track of that. See right here. So a very, very important part of small engine repair is to make sure the fuel system is clean. The fuel tank, fuel lines, and carburetor. So I'm going to start by filling this tank up with soap and water, swishing it around, making sure it's completely clean, and then most importantly, completely dry before I reinstall. And I'm going to go ahead and replace the fuel lines too. They were looking pretty, or the fuel line looking pretty deteriorated. Next we'll get into the carburetor. Take off the air filter cover. It's a 5/16, or you can use a screwdriver. See, this is bad news. Look at that air filter. There is no way that that air filter was filtering air anymore. It probably wasn't allowing any air to get in, which may have been contributing to the problems on this lawnmower. Yeah. Yuck. And you can see we're a little rusty inside there. Hopefully the inside of the carburetor doesn't look too bad, but we can clean all that up. So to remove this plate, there's 3 5/16 bolts. So with 3 bolts, the air cleaner mounting plate comes right off. And there's a hose back here, the breather hose, you just have to pull off. It usually just pulls off. There we go. So that's what you're dealing with there. But now we have a good look at the carburetor, and we can start to work on it a little bit. I told you, Ernest, I'm going to do this. Now we can go ahead and take the carburetor off. 2 3/8 bolts are all that hold it on at this point in the linkage. Right, so now the carburetor just comes right off, but we have to get it off the linkage. To get it off this linkage safely, you just rotate the carburetor counterclockwise, and then it just comes right off. Now we're going to take this float bowl off here and see what the inside of this carburetor looks like. Alright, let's zoom in on this carburetor. See what it looks like on the inside. 1/2-inch socket takes off the main jet nut here, carburetor float bowl nut. So when you look inside, you get this float bowl off and look inside, gives you a real good idea of what the condition of the carburetor is. So you can see there's a lot of crap in there, a little bit of rust. Not too bad. There's a lot of powder like material in there that definitely needs to be cleaned out. So I'm going to take some time now and with a toothbrush and some carburetor cleaner and whatever else it takes just to clean out all this stuff. If you look, it's just really dirty, a bunch of powdery residue, but we can clean that out. And we're also going to want to make sure all these passageways are clean, and we'll be cleaning out the float bowl as well, making sure it's spotless. And we'll want to make sure the main jet here, that all the holes in it are flowing freely. One of the things that's really important when cleaning out carburetors is to make sure they are as spotless as possible on the inside. So I'm going to spend quite a bit of time just scrubbing this and sandpaper, whatever you can use to scrape off all this rust and crap that's in there. Now if you look down into this hole, you'll see that red O-ring, and that's something that needs to be replaced every so often in these carburetors. That's the needle seat. I might reassemble this carburetor without replacing that after I cleaning up, just to see if it is still functioning. If I'm still having carburetor issues, then I will have to take this carburetor apart again and replace that. Or I might just do it now. I haven't decided. So I use a lot of different tools to clean out the insides of the carburetors. All sorts of brushes, pipe cleaners, stiff wire, not that, toothbrush, brass brushes, narrow screwdrivers, whatever it takes to get down into all the nooks and crannies here and clean out all this corrosion that has occurred. Brass brushes work great when they're brand new. Yeah, so you get off all the loose flaking material, get it as clean as possible, and reassemble. I think I'm going to go ahead and remove the needle seat, show you folks how to do that. It's a pretty easy procedure. It's about a $6 or $7 part, and it's worth doing. Carburetors need to be rebuilt like that every so often, 5 to 10 years, depending on how well taken care of it is. And I have a little tool right here that got from Tecumseh, and it pulls these little buggers out pretty easily, normally. At least on Tecumseh carbs it works pretty good. If you can't get that little piece of rubber out of there, you can use whatever, a pick. This one's not coming out, being stubborn, coming out in pieces. Sometimes they come out in pieces. I'm gonna go grab a pick to get that thing out of there. So, good old-fashioned pick here. I think we can get in there. Don't want to scratch it up too much in there. It's pretty sensitive areas. That's where all your fuel flows in. Boy, this one's being a real stinker. Oh, but I finally got it. So that's what you want to pull out of there. And any residue of the one that deteriorated there. Yeah. So I'm going to get a new one and press it in. So this is the part here from Briggs and Stratton 398188, and it consists of the needle seat here and the needle itself. Now the needle seat has grooves on one side, so you want to make sure to install that side down. So as always, before you press this new seat in, you're going to want to make sure that it's spotless in there. Put my pipe cleaner down in there. Just make sure everything's spotless. I'll put a little WD-40 or something like that in the hole to help the piece press in. I can still see little orange chunks of stuff down in there. You do not want any sediment left in there. Yeah, it seemed to clear it out. So I'll get this nice and clean, make sure there's no stuff down in there. Alright. And with this tool, you can just put it on like that. And once again, the grooves go down, and I'll just put a little WD-40 on here, press it into place, there we go. don't have to push down that hard. Alright, and so we want to use our new float needle as well. We can discard that. And I still have some cleaning to do on the inside of this carburetor. Still pretty dirty. So I'll get some wire and scrape it. Whatever I can get to reach down in there. A skinny screwdriver here that sometimes can get down in there. All the nooks and crannies. Yeah, these brass brushes work really good. They don't harm the aluminum. They get down in there and get rid of all that stuff. So I'm going to continue to work on this and get it as clean as possible. And I'm going to poke some wire down through these holes to make sure the passageways are clean. Same with these holes here. Make sure those passageways are clean. Maybe spray some air or some carburetor cleaner down through there. Yeah, we'll clean this baby up and I will show you how to reassemble it. So the float bowl's looking great now that I've cleaned it out. The float itself is looking nice and clean. The carburetor's not looking too bad. I just want to make sure that I remember to poke out the holes in this jet here. Make sure there's no obstructions there. I think we're good. So it's time to reassemble. This is our new float needle. It just goes on like that. Put it in place, and then your float hinge pin holds it all together. You don't have to worry about adjusting this float. It is an automatically adjusted float. There we go. And it looks like our gasket's still good on here, so I'm going to run with it. Do need a gasket for that. Where'd it go? Found it. Of course, if you had all new gaskets, that would be ideal, but I've noticed that a lot of these gaskets you can use several times without a problem. So once we tighten this back up, you don't want it to be too tight. I mean, you want it to be snug, but you can strip it out pretty easily. So not much torque when putting this back together. You don't want to strip anything out. About like that. Alright. So we have a gasket on this end, which is actually your primer gasket. This is where your air cleaner plate mounts up to. So we'll have to replace that gasket. There's a few different types of these, so make sure you get the exact type that came off of it. And you'll definitely want to clean off this gasket surface with the razor blade. Just make sure you get every remnants of gasket off of here. Alright, that's looking pretty good. So this is the gasket, and this gasket it's very important to replace because that is what allows your primer button to function correctly on a lot of these models. So that's the one gasket you really do need to replace if you take all of this apart. It's the air cleaner to carburetor gasket. So yeah, this gasket, basically it goes on the plate here and it just snaps in place. You can see there's little pins on each side that help hold it in place. Here, here, and here. So you just put it in place like this, and we're good to go back together. Now I think we can get this carburetor back on, and I will show you how to do that in case you forgot. So first thing you want to do is rotate the carburetor counterclockwise and put it on the throttle linkage, and then you rotate it, and then you're good to mount it up. There is an O-ring right back here, which you want to make sure is in good condition before you reassemble. That's the gasket for the carburetor to the engine. I don't know if you can see that. I'll focus in on it right there. So you want to make sure that's still there. And we had 2 3/8 bolts. Gonna tighten them up evenly to make sure that carburetor gets on there straight. So that was a basic carburetor rebuild we did there, except for replacing the float bowl gasket. Make sure it's going on evenly. Not too tight, but tight enough. Not sure what the spec is, but just don't break them. Alright, so our carburetor is back functioning. It's a good time to tighten up the head bolts too. They're not too tight, but quite often I'll find a loose one right over here by the exhaust. A little bit loose. And you just kind of tighten them a little bit. Oh, that one's loose too. In a random sequence. Get your oil dipstick, put it back in place. Alright, I'm going to tighten those up. I also put a new spark plug on this thing. Time for the fuel tank. I've already got the engine cover on. I didn't forget to tighten down the dipstick mount screw. Sometimes I forget to do that. Here's the gas tank. It's all cleaned out, all dried out. It's in place like this. We've got the 3 bolts on top and then 1 on the side. Okay, Ernest, the gas tank is now on. Got a new fuel line here, Ernest. Going to be ready to test out soon, Ernest. Alright, time to put the air cleaner backing plate on. Don't forget the gasket, and you'll want to plug it into that hose there, the breather. I usually put the carburetor mounting screws in first. Now you'll want to remember not to tighten these too tight because you can actually cause damage in there. You want to tighten it just tight enough to squish that gasket a little bit that's behind there. I mean, pretty firm, but too much and you can damage your priming bulb system. Make sure it's straight on there. Back and forth, and not too tight. If when you're done the primer bulb won't work, then you might have to tighten them down a little more. Give them one more little snug. All right. So one of the things you can do after you fill it up with gas is you can check to see if that primer bulb is working. And what you do is I just take that piece out of the way. I'll show you. So what I do is I just take this piece, bend it out of the way, and there's a little brass tube that you can see inside your carburetor. I'll get you guys at the right angle to see it. I think we're ready to fill this up. Hopefully we don't have any leaks. And then we can test out the primer. Make sure the primer button's working. So the first thing I want to check now that the gas has had a chance to get into the carburetor, I want to inspect this primer situation and make sure that the primer bulb is working properly. And as I said, if you look close, we should be able to see some gas pumping up through there when I push the button. Okay, here we go. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yeah, we're getting gas. So that's good. I think we're ready to try and start this sucker. Let's see what happens here. So I put a blade on there, the right side up, the appropriate length, and let's see what happens.